So many people find themselves in relationships and they don't really even know that this is healthy, this is unhealthy, really what to look out for and what to distinguish. A lot of people stay together for the kids, which I always advise against because then they're learning parents fighting is normal, love is fighting, love is abuse, love is chaos. So I think that if parents separate when it's not a good match, I think that they're doing their kids actually more of a service than a disservice. I always had a very inquisitive personality. I always wanted to know the why behind everything. What drove this person to become this way? Why do they act this way? Is it genetics? Is it environment? So I think that very inquisitive personality that I've always had, combined with always wanting to be of service, of help, merging the two together just made sense to me.
111, 110.
You training to be a street cop?
Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Street Cop Trading Podcast. I'm your host, founder and CEO of Street Cop Trading. My name is Dennis, but we don't have with us today somebody I met yesterday who sent an email in, and she wants to do training for law enforcement on body language, behavior, micro expressions. And so we hit it off yesterday. I just said, yo, come on the podcast today. Made time for me. I could already read her body language a little bit. She's a tad nervous. Is that a fact? I could see her increased rapid breathing, a little shallow. I could see it in your face a little bit. But we appreciate you being here, Alyssa DeLeo. You got a good last name for going to the law enforcement profession, Leo.
I considered it.
Yeah, you probably made a better choice by going to be a psychotherapist. So tell us who you are and what you do, and don't exclude anything. Tell us about where you grew up and all that other fancy shit that people tell us.
So Alyssa DeLeo, born and raised in Westchester County, New York. I was here the majority of my life, minus college, was in upstate New York, spent 2022 to 2023 in San Diego, quickly realized it was not for me. Now I'm back here in Westchester County and kind of figuring out where I want to go next.
Where did you start getting interest? We'll start with your psychotherapy side of your life. You're a therapist, a clinical therapist. How did you get into psychotherapy?
I always had a very inquisitive personality. I always wanted to know the why behind everything. What drove this person to become this way? Why do they act this way? Is it genetics? Is it environment? Was it adverse life experiences? Is it a culmination of all the three? So I think that very inquisitive personality that I've always had, combined with always wanting to be of service, of help, merging the two together just made sense to me.
I hear a lot of my friends who are therapists say the same thing. They were basically therapists for everybody they knew in their life before they became therapists.
Yep, that's exactly what it was. My friends in high school would always come to me with their problems and they thought it was helpful. And I was like, you know what? I may as well make a career out of it. I like to do it. I like helping other people. It's great to see it pay off and them grow. And I was like, you know what? I'll just go for it. And I really do love it. I don't regret making the decision. A lot of therapists are very wary about it. There's a high burnout rate. I hear a lot. Some are like, maybe I should have did something else. But I have not regretted it a single day. So I'm very happy with that decision that I made.
And so, what kind of psychotherapy do you practice?
A whole variety. I started 10 years ago at a residential foster care. That was where my internship placement was in graduate school. And then I continued there for about a year. And then I worked at a domestic violence organization. And so I educated teens and youth on these are the warning signs. I went into various schools, and this is what to look out for because they're not really taught that. So many people find themselves in relationships and they don't really even know that this is healthy, this is unhealthy, really what to look out for and what to distinguish. So there was that psychoeducation prevention piece so that they wouldn't find themselves in that situation in the future. And then I worked one-on-one with actual victims of domestic violence, helping them to overcome trauma, to find a way out of that relationship, because more often than not, they actually found themselves wanting to stay and wanting to go back. And, with the whole cycle of abuse and educating on them, with that piece. It was a slow process, but the majority eventually did find their way out of it.
When you did education for these young teens or adolescents, whatever it may be, do you think that any of them actually listened and it resonated with them? Have you ever heard any feedback from that at all?
Yeah, I handed out a survey after each presentation, and most felt that it was very informative, that they're confident with the warning signs right now. And if they were really young, I tailored it to friendships. So what would a healthy relationship look like in a friendship rather than, a boyfriend or a girlfriend or something like that? That was for really young, the middle schoolers. And some of them even recognized that they were in something unhealthy themselves, and they would pull me aside after and kind of chat with me a little bit about what was going on. And then some of them became so interested in it that we actually started an after-school group called STAR, Students Terminating Abusive Relationships, to bring more awareness to the community and the school at large.
It's interesting. One thing that people aren't taught in life is how to choose partners appropriately. And the reality is who can actually teach you in the world how to choose a partner appropriately when we know that the divorce rate is like 57, 58%. So the likelihood that your parents even got it wrong is significantly high. And I think that maybe the older generation of folks may be aware or know of a parental couple that kind of just stayed together when they never belonged together to begin with. So how could you ever expect to know what to choose as a partner, or these early warning signs, which you can maybe dive into a little bit regarding choosing somebody who may be appropriate, or some of the red flags you want to avoid?
We're not really taught these things in school or by our parents, and more often than not, there's a lot of divorce rates. A lot of people stay together for the kids, which I always advise against, because then they're learning subconsciously this is normal. Parents fighting is normal. Love is fighting. Love is abuse. Love is chaos. And then they're carrying that with them into their relationships, and they're seeing that dynamic happen. And to them, that's not a red flag. That's normal. What's a red flag is actually the complete opposite, which is healthy and stability. And they think that that's boring. So I think that if parents separate when it's not a good match, I think that they're doing their kids actually more of a service than a disservice. And I wish that parents realize that. And I have parents that I actually treat that are going through a divorce process, and I tell them, it's going to be really good for the kid. They're often so worried that it's going to be hurtful and that they should have both parents together, but they're mirroring so much dysfunction, and that's deeply embedded throughout the kid's entire adulthood unless they address that themselves or in therapy. And they repeat that pattern. And then people have kids and the cycle just keeps on repeating. So it takes one person to be like, this isn't right. I see that I am engaging in a pattern, a similar dynamic. I broke up with this person. And then they find themselves in a relationship, and it's almost an identical situation, just a different person, but the dynamic remains the same. And then if you trace it back, it's usually a similar dynamic in their childhood, whether it be their parents or their mom or their dad trying to get an unmet need fulfilled. So if they felt unloved and like they had to earn their, let's say, worth through their mom or their dad through performance or hard work, they'll try and do that in their relationships subconsciously, hoping that their partner, who's usually emotionally unavailable, will validate them and heal that childhood wound. So that's what you see the most going on. And then to add to that, there's an element of addiction to it as well. People get addicted to the stress and the adrenaline of that dysfunction in that relationship. So even though it's not good for them and it's not serving them, just like substance abuse or really any other type of addiction, they still stay in it because of that element of addiction. So it's really, really hard to break, and it's multifaceted.
Reminds me of, on a couple occasions, maybe met somebody, discussed engaging in a relationship, and right away them telling me, like, if you don't like to fight, I'm probably not for you. And the reality is I'm the most drama-free person in the world. So if you like to fight, I am not for you because I grew up in a household of constant bickering and fighting. There's nothing that actually is a bigger turnoff for me than somebody who wants to bicker and fight over nonsense. So I guess that kind of ties back into that's what they see as somebody caring. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, they see that as the norm. And then I also find that in counseling people in these situations, and I myself, I'm not I'm not it's not discriminatory, right? Just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean that I've never been in a situation like this, because I've absolutely been in relationships that weren't healthy for me. The problem comes is when you're emotionally invested in something, the logical part of your brain shuts off, and it's a lot harder to see those red flags and all of that stuff going on in the beginning. But going back to what I was saying right before that is a lot of the times people think that they can change their partner or they see potential or they hold on to those 3 to 6 months in the beginning, but that's not actually who the person is. You could put on a tremendous performance, a facade in the beginning, and people will go on for years and years and years and be like, he or she was so good and so charming and so charismatic, and they took me away and they bought me gifts and they gave me all this attention. And I say, yes, but that's not who they actually are at their core. And they get stuck just wanting to go back to that and thinking that there's something that they can do to make their partner go back to that person who wasn't, it was a curated image of them. It wasn't actually them.
Like there are subtle red flags that people tend to ignore. And let me just say that some of these red flags I think are things that people can't help, and some are personality flaws. So let me try to differentiate my thought on the two. Subtle red flags that people can't help. This is a great person who comes from a little bit of a screwy family. There is nothing they can do that wasn't their fault that their family is weird and screwy and nutty and has some history. This person has managed to break the perpetual cycle of that family history and now has emerged into something admirable. On the other side, subtle red flags. We'll take it from a guy's perspective. You go to the bathroom while you and your girlfriend are hanging out at a bar or nightclub, and you come back and she's talking to another dude, right? That's a problem because that conversation should be, I'm with somebody, don't bother talking to me. Those are those things where you're saying to yourself, that's concerning. And those are the things you really shouldn't ignore. And we all do it because we get caught into this mindset of think there's a lot of things that go into it. Like maybe I found somebody, this could be the one, this fairy tale thinking of if I just kind of ignore some of this stuff, the problem is it just starts to build and build and build. And so I always tell people like it's so much easier to rip the band-aid off in the beginning and just get back to the dirty work.
Yeah. You have to know what your non-negotiables are, and so many people don't know what they are. They have it written down kind of what they want in a partner, and then they'll do something like that and they'll be like, "Oh, well, he or she checks all of the other boxes." But usually those little things that you ignore in the beginning, your intuition knows right off the bat, I'm not okay with that. And the longer that you ignore that intuition, you perpetuate that relationship, and then those subtle red flags turn into big red flags. And then, you're stuck in this vicious cycle for a very long time. But I always say just you don't want to be too flighty where you run away, immediately off of the slightest thing. But something like that, that's disrespect. If your partner's already disrespecting you at such an early stage, imagine what they're going to be doing a year from now behind your back. If at a bar in person, they're already engaging in that type of behavior.
I'll say this and you can respond to it. Think about how much bad advice we get from people we trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you, I and this kind of ties into something that I tell people all the time, especially we have a younger staff here, and I'm really trying to give them the things that I've learned later on in life that I should have been taught earlier in life. And so, we'll have people like, "Oh, my parents have me putting money into this savings account or this 401k or this." I'm like, "You even know where you're putting your money?" And they're like, "No, but my parents say it's good." And I say to them, how wealthy are your parents? And the reality is most people are not wealthy. So why are you taking advice from somebody who has no idea how to manage money? Maybe better than some people comparatively. Maybe your parents are more responsible, but they don't have the knowledge or the know-how to give you the advice on what you should be doing with your money. Warren Buffett can show you what to do with your money on YouTube in 45 minutes. But your father, who's a blue collar worker, probably isn't the guy. Same thing with people who don't run a business. They should probably not be giving you business advice. And it ties back into this circle of it's always funny how your friend who's the single one always has the most advice for you about your decisions on who you should be dating or the one who can't work out a relationship. And people need to remember, like, misery loves company. And there's nothing more miserable than and you could spot these ones from a mile away, and people are going to laugh when they hear this. Go to a bar or a nightclub at 1:30 in the morning when the thing starts, or 2 o'clock when it starts to shut down, and look at the guys who have met a girl and the friends who won't let it happen. Those are your problematic, trustworthy, quote unquote, friends that are easily manipulating what could potentially be a good relationship, but because they think they know better and you trust them, they're giving you bad advice. So advice is very dangerous. You should really trust the source of your advice. Your thoughts on that?
No, I absolutely agree. I'm very, very, very selective with who I go to for advice. Like if it's mentoring, I'll go to someone that I worked with a while and actually taught body language and executive coaching with him. He goes across the world and he teaches people communication skills. He's an expert in it. He's a former Wall Streeter in it. So if I want advice on how to grow a business and how to communicate more effectively and how did I sound doing that and what should I do next, I'm going to go to him. I'm not going to go to someone that doesn't communicate well or doesn't know how to run a business. If I have, I guess, questions and I need an objective point of view with someone I'm dating, I'm not going to go to someone that's in perpetual relationship drama or failed relationships. I'm going to go to my friend that's in a very happy, healthy marriage and be like, hey, like, what do you think about this situation? And you also, I firmly do believe that you are a product of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. So I really try and drown out the noise of anyone that isn't either kind of where I am, but better than I want to be in every single area. And those are the people that I go to, the people that I aspire to be, and that are above me in certain areas.
I'm going to address that first and then come back to some things that I want to advocate.
Yeah.
You know, when people say, first of all, I want to say one of my favorite sayings, but one of my favorite authors who I had the pleasure of conversing with one time, and his name's Seth Godin. He's known in the business world as the godfather of marketing, but he's so much more than that. He's just a very stoic, smart, and probably one of the most interesting people who have so many things figured out. Actually, this ties into what the next thing I'm going to say after this is. But one of his quotes is, if you're in a room and you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, unless you're Jeff Bezos. Because no matter what room you're in, you're the smartest person in the room if you're Jeff Bezos. So another thing that I like, and just this is still on this topic, is people tend to think that they can look in their immediate circle for 5 people that they want to or aspire to be like. And the reality is most of us come from an environment, even middle class, which is kind of an interesting title because I just don't believe there's a middle class. I think it's upper middle class, lower middle class, maybe impoverished, and then very, very upper class.
Yes.
And different personality. We're not talking about personalities. We're talking about socioeconomic environments where the conversation alone is just different at each one of these economic classes. That's just the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are striving to find people that you aspire to, or you want to aspire to be like, here's the great news for everybody listening to this. You can go online, you can buy their books, you can listen to their podcasts, you can watch their YouTube videos. You don't have to know them. You can just be the friend that listens. So if you want to learn how to run a business, there are so many people out there who have built significant businesses that will tell you how to run a business and what to do in a business. You'll get to learn which ones are full of shit and which ones aren't. But the same thing with relationships. If you're having difficulty in relationships, there are people out there who will teach you how to identify red flags and green flags. If you have a problem with emotional intelligence, you can work on that stuff, but you've got to be willing to want to do that. Your friend Jane and Steven and this person and that person, they're probably not going to serve you well. I don't want to rant on this, but this past weekend, I went to a party and, it's funny because I just sent one of the moms I was speaking to there a video I watched on how Alex Hormozy, which is like the guy that I'm consuming mostly right now, because that's business and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create things to make things better for everybody. And so I need the help of others to make sure I can get to the 700,000 cops in the country and it all works. And boy, people are going to be nuts when they find out what I've come up with the next thing that Street Cop Training is doing. But I said to her, well, so the mother of my children was like, hey, are you going to be staying here? And I'm like, for what? And she's like, I don't know. Like, you always leave. And I'm like, but there's nothing here for me. There's a bunch of people getting drunk on a Saturday in the afternoon, and I'm trying to win. And then I said this to one of the moms there. I said, it's not that hard to win. It just takes some discipline. And you'll never find how to win at this party right now. So, in and of itself, I'm going to win and beat the rest of you out right now. That's how simple it is. By literally leaving here, going home, and just being productive.
Yep.
Even if I get some of the to-do bullshit off my list during this time, that's just the discipline that I think people can carry into many different topics and areas to get ahead of where they want to go. So
I agree. I don't think people realize how easy it is too. I mean, just virtue of association and what you're listening to, like you said, books, podcasts, who you're hanging out with, all of those things, a combination of all of them, you're reprogramming your subconscious mind either for the better or the worse, depending on what you're engaging in, what you're immersing yourself with. So let's say that you're forced to interact with people that just aren't healthy. They're not that 1 to 5%. They're the ones that are partying, like you said, on a Saturday afternoon. They don't have that growth mindset. Maybe you have to be around them in the workforce. Maybe they are your family members. Maybe they're friends that right now you can't really get away from. When you can get away from them, that's when you need to be doing the things like reading the books, listening to the podcast. I make sure that I tailor my social media pages and my For You pages so that it's nothing but inspiration. So it's not drama. It's all growth mindset, stoicism. How can I be better? Things of that nature. Visualization, I practice on a daily basis. That's the easiest way to reprogram your subconscious mind and help you take action and achieve your goals. So I'm a huge proponent of that. It's made significant and profound impacts on my physical health. I had a really bad physical health journey that I went through, and I rewired myself out of all three of them through visualization. So there's little simple things that you can do that a lot of people just don't have the discipline to really engage in, but can help them get ahead and really, get to where they want to be.
and let me just add to what I'm saying there is that there is no judgment. You are allowed to live your life the way you choose to. Anybody who's listening. So if you want to go and get wasted on a Saturday, God bless. Just God bless. But if you are choosing a path to go down, a certain unique path, and it's different than everybody else, I'm here to just tell you those are not the people that are going to help get you there. And you know what? You can find your people in certain places and certain events and certain venues, but you won't find them where you typically thought you could find them. And that's perfectly fine. If you enjoy doing those things, there is no judgment. And I recognize that people need to disassociate to try to calm their anxiety, maybe ease some depression. I recognize all of that. And so God bless. But you have to understand something. I am here just giving a different perspective because sometimes people just need to hear or see it for that light bulb to go, oh my God, that's how people get ahead. It's much more easy than you think. It's just difficult because you have to shift how you behave in your complete lifestyle.
Yeah, I agree. There is no right or wrong. If you're happy with the way things are going, then so be it. But if you want to make change, it's not as hard as people think that it is.
happiness the most subjective thing you could ever think of in your life? It really is equal to success. Your happiness. If you're happy doing these things, nothing should be materialistic. I have different goals and different visions
Right.
for what I'm trying to do for the world, what I'm trying to do for my family, for my children. That's me. That's the path. It's a very unique path. It's the one that's less chosen. It's a little more difficult.
Hmm.
But if these people are happy doing what they're doing, oh, God bless. Like, I hope so. And guess what? Sometimes I like to get festive and goof off. I
Yeah.
just do it for everybody else.
Right. Absolutely.
You know, even when we're talking here, I think people resonate with this training company, myself, and probably the things that you're saying. And it's so cool to I thought about this in the shower because I've said this 1,000 times. It's where I do my most of my deep thinking and my thoughts for the day. And so I thought, why do people follow other people? It's because for the first time, somebody might hear something that resonates with them and makes sense to them that they may not have thought of before. And they say, that's actually right. That's very interesting. How does that affect you?
Following other people.
Well, how do you find yourself if you're talking about trying to find this group of five people, quote unquote, you're the average of the five people you spend the most time with, which again could be podcasts or books. What do you think it is right now in your life that people or that you find in people that might attract you to them?
Like, how will I find those five people? Is that what you're asking?
Well, who are your five people? And do you think you've found them yet?
No. No. I mean, I want to say the bulk of them are virtually. I have I have a couple of really good girlfriends who I could say probably are maybe two of them, but I think I resonate with what you're saying, where your path is so unique. I consider it almost 1% of the population, and it's really hard to find those 1 or let's say even 5% of people in the hometown that you grew up in. So for me, it really is mostly virtually or a couple of those close girlfriends that I have or my one mentor that I have that lives locally to me that I did business with, but I'm still working on it. I think, okay, well, where could I find these people? And it's not going to be, for me, it's not going to be at a bar or a club or a lounge. It might be at a gym, it might be at a park, it might be at the library, it might be at a coffee shop, but it's not going to be at those other types of places. So I try and put myself in those situations, not intentionally just to meet those people, but that's where I enjoy to spend my time because that's where I am drawn to and that's where I grow as a person.
Even in law enforcement, there is a certain percentage of people who do not see this profession as a job. They see it as a calling. And often they're the outcasts who care too much. And I got to be honest with you, I find it so contradictory to everything that you're taught early on as a law enforcement officer or while you're going through the process that you should care. You should, of all the jobs to care about and to have enthusiasm, fighting crime, saving lives, and being this great addition to society should be something that we should all be wearing as a badge of honor. No pun intended. But the reality is we essentially in this profession find ourselves as outcasts. That's kind of where the company that I built grew from because I was outcasted, accepted friends, but my work ethic, what I was into, what I like to do was just different than everybody else in this realm. So
Yeah.
when we have our conferences or our trainings, the people that converge into these events are that group of people that you want to surround yourself with. You found your people. Some people have none of these people at their agency and they feel such an outcast. And this transfers the same way into your personal life as well. This is the same thing about you're invited to this party, you have to go, you have nothing in common with anybody here. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Super draining.
Well, I don't even allow people to tap into my batteries if I know we're going that route. I'm very, very protective of where I'm going with conversations. And if it's nothing I can gain from or contribute to help other people to, I don't even get involved. So
Yeah.
there's only so much energy that I have in this body every single day. And I certainly don't want to be discussing things basically that are out of my control or repetitive that we already all know the answer to.
Yeah. You got to be intentional with your energy. It's finite.
There's no question about it. You get to recharge your batteries every night. You can always fix that the next day. But I guess this conversation was just to get people to maybe see things a little differently and know that they're not the only person out there, or maybe the people who aren't that to understand the mindset of other people, or maybe people who are that to understand the mindset of the people who aren't that. So the one thing we can all do is not try to measure how you perceive other people based on what you think happiness is. Let them be. If they're happy doing what they're doing, let them be. It's fantastic. But at the same time, that should be honored in both ways. And that's my thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
How did you get into micro expression training? Tell me about that.
So micro expressions, I stumbled upon that when I started becoming really fascinated with body language. I love reading people. I love decoding people. In my profession, I knew that if I was going to be able to tune into my client's emotional state and really understand who they were as a person, I would have to be able to read the totality of them. And with body language, that's 75%. What they're telling you verbally is only 15. So if you don't understand body language and how to read those cues, you're missing out on a whole nother level of communication, a whole nother language. So I was doing myself a disservice by not understanding how to read my clients, but also to help me in my career, first impressions, interviews, interpersonal relationships, charisma, in all different areas. But I want to say primarily to help read my clients. And then I did a 6-month training with a behavioral investigator who told me all about body language. And then there was a segment of lie detection. And Dr. Paul Ekman, I did some of his trainings as well, the founder of Micro Expressions. And I became obsessed with that one specific area. So body language in general is amazing, but I found facial expressions and learning how to tune into micro expressions the most helpful because it's such a brief involuntary movement that's made on the face, and there's 7 of them. And once you learn how to spot them, you cannot unsee them. Someone makes a little flash of disgust or contempt, and you're like, wow, okay, I'm going to take a mental note of that. There's something about that they didn't like, and I may not address it right now, but I know that there's something going on there, and I'm going to make sure that I address that at a later point. Whether it's a client talking about their dad using distancing language, my father, people will do sometimes if maybe they don't have a good relationship with them. Or I'll ask them a question and they'll make a certain facial expression. And even just strangers on the street, and I'm meeting them and I'm interacting with them, and they'll flash something, whether it's fear, and I'm like, okay, did I do something within my body language that made them a little bit uncomfortable, and how can I readjust what I'm doing to put them at ease?
It's quite comical that you say that once you see it, you can't unsee it. I think the only time I can really turn it off is when I'm really disengaged, maybe trying to enjoy my social life somewhat. But outside of that, I'm constantly speed reading people's faces, and I can pick up on things. As a matter of fact, it used to be a big joke in the office. People come in and cover their face when they came to talk to me, and I could pick up on when people something's bothering somebody. I think I'm very intuitive with that, but also I don't want to say I've studied it in depth like you have, but I certainly am familiar with what those things are, having some exposure to it. I don't even want to call it training. You ever watch the first 48?
No, I thought you were going to ask, have you ever watched Lie to Me? That's where I thought you were going with that. The first 48? No, what
Yes,
is
the
that?
first 48 is a show on real life murder investigations. It's probably one of the best shows for law enforcement to watch because typically when an organization chooses somebody to investigate very, very high level serious crime, that is typically one of the only areas where politics or favoritism or nepotism is removed, and the best of the best, typically really talented law enforcement investigators, get placed. Typically, not everywhere. People probably listen to this going, "That's not true. Like, we got a fucking idiot to investigate." I know, but what they do is they interview people, and there's a little bit of a cheat to the game when you watch it, but you can learn so much as a law enforcement officer, even as a human being, if you're really paying attention to what their body language is as they're being interviewed. You can tell when somebody knows more than they're revealing. You can get good at this. You can tell when somebody is involved. You can tell what the reactions are when certain statements are revealed to them. You know, we talk about in class. It's like we play a video of this guy who is providing false information in one of my courses. And as soon as they accuse him of lying about his name and tell him to turn around, there's no like, why? Like, what happened? He just like turns around, puts his hands in the back. And I try to explain that in class. I'm like, if he didn't have warrants and they weren't onto him, he probably would have been like, what is this for? Why is this happening? But in his mind, what you're seeing is, fuck, I'm caught. Right? This worked the last 5 times, but fuck, I'm caught. It was that quick submission to turn around, put your hands behind your back. There was no pushback at all. Where on the first 48, if somebody is falsely accused of being involved in a homicide, you'll see how aggressive and angry they become for the false accusation. Now, you can take that stuff and then go watch Live PD, where you have some very talented cops on there. I must say, I've seen a few episodes lately or on Patrol Live where I was very impressed with a couple people. But all these things you're seeing, you're like, how is this guy not seeing this? How is this girl not seeing this? This is clear as day to where we're going with this thing, but because they have no training.
Yeah, once you're trained in lie detection, you pick up on stuff right away. I mean, not to go into too much detail with the Amanda Knox case. I don't know if you remember that situation with her roommate in Italy. And do you remember the Amanda Knox case at all? Her roommate was murdered. Anyway, she was convicted multiple times, then she was let go. But I even have certain clips and I've done trainings where I incorporated certain materials, but there's just, with lie detection, it's always about incongruency. So you build a baseline. You have to know someone's baseline because everyone's tells are different. And then when there's discrepancies, it's like, all right, if there's a cluster of 3 to 6, that might mean something. So when I'm looking at someone being interviewed and they're like, did you do it? And they're like, no, but they're shaking their head, yes. What's going on there? If that's in their baseline already, where they're kind of incongruent with that to begin with, which you don't see too often with the head nodding, you kind of write it off. But to me, that's one of the biggest things. Even A-Rod, who I love, I'm a huge Yankee fan. Have you ever used performance enhancement drugs? No. He like nods his head, yes. So that's just one. Yeah, that's just one tell, but then he leaks contempt after as well. So there will be a few different things going on. So no matter how hard someone tries to not give something away, their body is always leaking something. Facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, something is shifting. Girls, sometimes they'll do pacifying behaviors. If you start asking them a question and they weren't doing that throughout, but they're touching their neck, that's a pacifying behavior. Or a necklace. A guy will commonly like scratch the back of his head, pacifying, or like on their arm or their leg. And it's like, okay, what are they trying to self-soothe? What's making them uncomfortable around this particular area? So it's so beyond micro expressions. It's so broad, but yeah, it's very, very useful once you learn it all.
It is very useful, and I think people just need to be exposed to it a little bit more to understand what it is.
Right.
I don't think it's that difficult if you spend a little time trying to pay attention to what it actually is.
No. I think the statistic is we predict lying with up to 54% accuracy, but it could be increased 90% with the proper training.
How does it work for like psychopaths and sociopaths? Does it differ? Is differentiated at all?
It's a little bit different. I find that they leak something what's called duping delight a little bit more. I analyzed a whole Ted Bundy interview, before, and he has this one, they tend to have a little bit of a smirk to them, almost like they're getting away with it. But also they'll leak something a lot called duping delight, where they're almost happy with the fact that maybe they murdered someone. And it's this little, like, very brief side smirk. I wish I could pull it up on the screen and show, but it's called duping delight. And it's when generally a psychopath thinks that they are getting away with a lie. And it's so brief and it's so subtle. So I tend to see duping delight being leaked a lot with psychopaths, as well as that kind of weird smirk throughout, but also the complete absence of emotion, just totally void of emotion. So a mother being interviewed who was later found out to have killed her child, if she's being interviewed versus someone that didn't murder her kid and was innocent, you'll see real genuine sadness in the forehead and in the mouth because that's where it's leaked. When someone's faking it, they might even get their eyes to water up a little bit, but there will be no movement in their forehead. There will be no lip pursing at all. And so it's just that void of emotion that you tend to find with psychopaths as well. Mine is actually leaking that happiness, like I was telling you. So you get less of that fear and that sadness, and you get these weird, subtle micro expressions of happiness and duping delight. So I would say that's the difference there with psychopaths.
Maybe it's not your expertise, but how often do you think that law enforcement runs across in the day-to-day operation of police work sociopaths or psychopaths?
More often than any other profession, I would say for sure. Probably pretty commonly because those are the people that they're going to be getting calls for, and domestics a lot, or shootings and just regular criminal activity, burglaries, all those types of things. So if anyone's going to be subjected to it the most, it's definitely going to be law enforcement.
How does one go from, and you've seen like some of these mafioso guys, we'll say, where at home movies are these teddy bears or these loved fathers and just light and delightful human beings, to being able to flip a switch and become a murderous, torturing psychopath or a sociopath. How does that happen?
I think that there is a genetic predisposition. If you look at the brain of a psychopath in an MRI and someone that's not a psychopath, it looks completely different. Different areas in the brain are lit up, different areas aren't. So I think that there's a genetic predisposition to it for sure. And I think something in the environment pulls the trigger. Ted Bundy, for example, his childhood seemed pretty good from everything that was gathered. There may have been little bits here and there, but I don't think there was enough of a trauma to be like, all right, like gonna become a psychopath now because I experienced such intense levels of trauma. So I think that there's a genetic predisposition for some, and I think environment pulls a trigger. And going back to Ted Bundy, for his, it was actually pornography and a little bit of violent pornography. So he admitted that's what kind of led him down that path. So if he never stumbled upon that, maybe he never would have went on a killing spree. But it's different for everyone, and for some people, it is environment, and environment does play a role. But I think that the most dangerous types are the ones that are born that way and have that predisposition, and their brains are inherently wired differently from birth.
It's so funny when you talked about because I can see myself on the screen here when we talk. When you talked about Ted Bundy, I don't know if you caught on it. I actually had disgust on my face. I went like this. Like I was like,
You
right,
could
like
feel it on your face. You could feel it.
I could see it in the video because I could see myself on the video. Like I just caught myself doing a micro expression disgust because that's like wild to me that you would engage in sexual fantasies, that you would murder somebody at the end of it.
Hmm.
what's the name for that? I forgot what it's called. Like, there's a name for that. Is there a name for that kind of sexual fantasy? I don't
Mm,
know it. I know there's a name for it.
I don't
Anyway,
know.
have you ever watched the Iceman interviews on HBO?
Yes.
You love that.
I do. Psychopaths for the longest time intrigued me the most, and that's actually my lie detection. I fell in love with it even more when I studied psychopaths, just because of it made it harder. It made it harder because they didn't have that much emotion. I was like, it's trickier than someone that generally is nervous, but psychopaths, their baseline for anxiety and being nervous, like true psychopaths to the core, not someone that's just super defiant and is all over the place. But those high functioning psychopaths, they tend to have like pretty good an emotional baseline and emotional, I don't want to say like emotional intelligence, but they can keep themselves so even keeled. It's mind blowing. So it intrigued me even more because they didn't really admit that much, so it made it harder. It was like, all right, like what's going on here? They're not engaging in these pacifying and these self-soothing behaviors and these other lying tells that a normal non-psychopathic individual would be.
Is that because they think they're smarter than everybody else, and there's an element of narcissism there as well?
There's definitely an element of narcissism. I don't think that psychopathy and narcissism don't co-occur. I think there's plenty of narcissists that aren't psychopaths, but I think that every psychopath has an element of narcissism to them for sure. But again, I think it just comes down to the way that their prefrontal cortex is wired, and they're able to handle stress in very different ways, and they tend to be very resilient to it. Um, so, I mean, a lot of the times they are able to undergo really high intense situations. They're drawn to certain types of careers and things of that nature that most people wouldn't be able to necessarily be equipped to do so, just because of how they were wired. And some people do it in a healthy way, like a surgeon. That might be not all surgeons are psychopaths. Disclaimer right there. But if someone does have those urges and they want to go about it in a way that's productive without killing people, I mean, that's just one example, becoming a surgeon and being able to cut people open. That's one way to be like a healthy, high functioning psychopath.
You can see that I'm kind of just displaying my facial expressions already,
Yeah.
but you know, is there certain ways to approach narcissism, psychopaths, sociopaths that open the doors for communication and maybe a different way to approach these people versus how you would approach somebody who, is a what's the word I'm looking for? And I usually know right away, is a moral person or a moral person committing an immoral act.
And what
How
type
do
of
you
setting?
I think maybe for our audience in a law enforcement setting, and I got to be honest with you, I think with my years of experience and the amount of work that I put in, I've developed a real good ability to communicate with many different personalities. Why that occurred, I think it's just through my experience. I think I've always been able to talk to everybody. And I think maybe what's helped me is I've always seen people as humans themselves, no matter what they did. I think that really helped me to try to express compassion, maybe empathy, but at least see them from the human side without judgment. That was only for the intention to achieve a law enforcement objective. Some of the things that these people did may have offended me significantly, with my morality. However, I knew and I learned that in order to get them to trust me or to consider me to be maybe as intelligent as they are, was to release the judgment of that and almost try to see things the way they saw things.
I agree with you. What you said right there, validating them, looking at them as if they're a person, not being super confrontational, not being very critical. They're hypersensitive to things like that. And again, just treating them as if they're a human and, you know, building that rapport with them. You can even tie that back to body language too, non-threatening body language. Making sure even hands are you said, because you mentioned trust. So what popped up for me, hands are your biggest trust indicators. Because if you go back to caveman days, if we don't see hands, we feel very unsafe inherently because we could be holding a weapon. You know, that's just how our brains are wired and they haven't really evolved. So I always tell people just make sure your hands are visible and expressive, but not too expressive. So if you don't need to have your hand like by your gun, I would encourage you like maybe not to have it there. But I think like what you said, it's what I do in therapy too, is I treat people as human beings. I don't care what they're coming in with, and I genuinely don't judge them. Like regardless of what they've done, I'd like to say that I don't think I've judged a single client that's come to me, and I treat them all equally. Like no matter what they've done, they're there, they're trying to do work, they're trying to better themselves, and the only way that you could possibly build rapport with someone is if you're non-confrontational, is if you have body language that is open, it's not threatening, and also just being kind of like inquiring as to them, maybe letting them speak a little bit more. Psychopaths and narcissism, they love talking about themselves. So maybe giving them a little bit of an opportunity to do that a little bit more and cater to their ego, I would say.
Are narcissists born or are they developed?
I would say, okay, so there's a little bit of a genetic predisposition for all personality disorders, but narcissism for the bulk is usually created through adverse childhood experiences, 100%. I would say I could almost tie back every single narcissist that I've dealt with to something that happened in their childhood.
The brain is a very interesting thing, and I think I've my journey in my 40s has really helped me self-reflect of who I am, my behavior, good or bad, right? Um, I think that my decision to try to be the best person that I can be and maybe break the generational bullshit that I was put through
Yeah.
and try to put on display for my children better qualities of a human being. And one thing I say to them all the time is like Beninos always do the right thing. Like we don't it doesn't if somebody needs our help, the Beninos are there. That doesn't matter. That's who Beninos are. And I'll say things like Beninos are winners. Like, my kids are like, why do you drive fast? I'm like, because we're winners. Right.
That.
I say things like that because I want them for me, I really want them not conforming to being what they're expected to be. I hate that. Um, I hate the school system. I think the people that work in the school system are fantastic. I think I've met some of the most wonderful human beings in the world, but it's a completely failed system, and it serves my children no purpose outside of maybe socializing and basic skills for reading, writing, and arithmetic. So that's a very controversial topic, and people really are steadfast in their position on things like that. But I really try to teach my kids to do things differently than other people are doing. Don't follow the rules because the
Yeah.
rules is where rule followers don't change the world. That's just how it goes. And I don't mean that as a lawbreaker. I'm saying a rule follower. So what the rules might be, sometimes we got to break them. There's actually a very funny video. I'm gonna cough. Edit that out, Pat. Um, there's a very funny video that if you actually it might be my Instagram now that we're friends on Instagram, where we are in Disney 2 years ago with my two sons, the middle ones, and I tell him before we go on this Aladdin ride. It's a bullshit Aladdin ride, right? It goes up. It's got like the button you press and the hydraulics bring you up or down. And so I hear it's only just me and them two at that moment. Their mother caught the Disney flu. The other one didn't want to go. My daughter at that time was too young. So it was just me and these two kids. So I knew that he couldn't ride the ride unless he had an adult. So I think at the time he was 6 because he's 8 now. And I said, if they ask, you must tell them that you're 8. He's like, but I'm not. I go, yeah, I understand. But it's not going to be any harm or foul. And we're going to be screwed if you say that you're 6. So when the girl says to you, how old are you? You tell her 8. And so this video is I'll send it to you. I'll find it. And it's
Yes,
just
please send it.
like, she's like, how old are you? And he goes, 8. And she goes, okay. And she keeps walking, turns around, and goes, oh, it worked. It worked. And I went, yeah, play cool, bro. That wasn't a rule that put anybody in jeopardy. That was to me a bullshit formality. This ride was not dangerous. And sometimes, in order to achieve things that we want to achieve, you can't just conform to what the rules are. It's just not how it goes. So I'm not developing a narcissist. I like to, like my kids just did last week, the Daredevil dive. They're 8 and 6. Well, just turned 7. 8 and 7. So the Daredevil dive is they bring you up in this like. Have you been to Six Flags Great Adventure? And
Oh my gosh, I was a roller coaster enthusiast for years.
so
Love
you know the
Six
thing where they
Flags.
pull you up 150 feet in the air, in that little like net basket.
Which one? Great Adventure in
Yeah,
New
Great
Jersey?
Adventure. Yeah,
Which ride?
this is called Daredevil Dive, and so you got to pay like $45 to go on it,
Oh
and they
yes,
drag.
yes, yes, yes. I know
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
So I put an 8 and a 7-year-old on this thing, and they went up, and
Love
they're
it.
like, "I'm like, guys, don't be bitches, just go do it." And I can't imagine once they were committed to doing it, what was going through their head if they're being yanked up on a winch 150 feet in the air. But I knew what the response would be once it was done. And when they came off, I'll send you the video of that as well, of how happy they were. And so for me, that's that confidence building where I see other parents like, no, it's too dangerous, da. And I'm like, don't fucking listen to these people. Don't ever tell
Nope.
my kids that. I push them way beyond their comfort zones constantly.
I love that. You have to. It's the only way to grow, and it's the only way to prevent anxiety and being stuck is you have to show your brain that this isn't dangerous. And the only way to do that is to constantly put yourself in situations that you're afraid of. Most parents, they're afraid and they project that onto their kids, and it leads to a lot of avoidance behaviors, which only exacerbates the anxiety. So, a lot of the work I do is actually exposure therapy. All right, you're worried about this, you're going to face it. Maybe if you're afraid of heights, we're not going to start off with that ride that you were telling about, but we'll start off with something small and we'll slowly build upon it, but always constantly getting out of your comfort zone for sure.
I literally am the guy who, listen, there are things that are just too dangerous for young children. But I got to tell you, people have asked, like, what is that? And I'm like, yeah, I really haven't discovered that yet. I won't put them in peril where their lives or significant injury is at stake.
Right.
Let me back that up just a little bit because sometimes I do. Sometimes they want to do those things, and I have to reserve myself and just go, all right, like I can't sit here and say, like, sometimes they come down the street doing 55 miles an hour on a quad at 7 years old. And I'm
Yep.
like, or like ATV, and I'm just like, oh, and then I'll just have a talk. I'm like, look, your father doesn't mind you guys trying wheelies and this, that. Like, I get it. I'm with it. I want you to explore. I want you to experiment. I want you to do stupid shit. I want you to get hurt. I want all those things, but I just can't have you get killed. You
Yeah.
break an arm, like we had a kid get stitches here a couple days ago. I have a 140-foot inflatable slip and slide. Did you see that yet on my Instagram?
Oh, I didn't see it. I'll take a look after.
Yeah, so he came down the slide, split the webbing of his toes, and had like so they came and got me. They're like, and like there was blood. Like I'm like I've been around quite a bit and I've seen a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of blood in the driveway. I'm like, holy shit! Right in my head, I was saying, holy shit. I'm like, you thought he lost a toe or something. So I came over, I took a look at it to assess it. I have trauma bags here and first aid bags. I have to have them here because there's so much crazy shit going on at my house. And so, with that being said, I told my oldest son, go tell Phil's father that he's gonna have to get stitches. Right. I buttoned them up real nice. We cleaned them up, buttoned them up. His father came over and I'm like, hey man, like these things happen. Your son's adventurous. I'm not gonna stop them from doing these things. Right. He's just as nutty as my kids. And so this is the price to be paid. And then, my oldest is like, I never had stitches. I never got a broken bone. I'm like, you're gonna living here. Holy
It's inevitable. It's gonna happen.
yeah. And like the reality is like I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I just expect it and I almost want them to experience it.
Yeah.
As nuts as that sounds, because I am not a helicopter parent. And the older these parents get, it's fucking nuts to watch how they behave with these children.
Yep. A lot are. It's either you'll see very helicopter parents or not too much involved at all, but that little middle ground is that sweet spot. So I think what you're doing sounds great, honestly.
Well, yeah, and like that comes from a lot of education of how I think they should be. Like I'm just trying to understand their personalities and guide them correctly. My kids are like,
Yeah,
we
and
have to go
you're
to
helping
college.
And you're helping them not look at the world through a lens of fear. And that's what society is always trying to instill us to do. You turn on the news, fear, this, disaster, that. Um, Teachers, I mean, everywhere you go, everyone's always talking about something that's scary or fear-based. And so we're reprogrammed, we are programmed to view the world through a scary lens in a scary place. And unless you put yourself in those scary situations, over and over and over again, you're never going to be able to reprogram yourself out of that. So that's exactly what you're doing with your kids. So kudos there. I love it.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that I'm trying to get them, because I can't, as a father, determine what their future is going to be. All
Mm-hmm.
I can do is help groom them
Yep.
individually. Like my daughter is fearless, but I also don't let them be scared. Right? I don't ever add more fuel to the fire of anxiety of, oh my God, what's going to happen? You're like, sometimes, like even now she's learning to swim. She's 4.5.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she's ever swimmies on, I'll like just literally, like, she doesn't want to do it. I'm like, just take her and like show her that it's gonna be okay. It's fine. We can go in the deep end together. Let me help you get used to this. Where, I see other people like, oh, well, he's not a good swimmer. What's he going deep in? I'm like, well, he's got 5 feet on each side to swim to where he can hold on to something. So he's gonna make it. And we're all here. So stop doing that, because you're getting these kids fucking worked up and terrified.
Well, yeah, and they're mirroring their parents' nervous system. So if their parents are always in that fight or flight and avoid this and don't do this and catastrophic and oh my God, what do you think their kids are going to turn into? Like walking panic attacks. So what you're doing is amazing because you're teaching them that it is okay and it's not scary. So I think it's tremendous what you're doing, and I don't see parents doing that enough. So bravo to you.
People feel very guilty when their kids are around me, and they always say to me like, we need to send our kids here for a few days. I'm like, you need to send yourself here for a few days. It's not your kids, it's you.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, but people are so set in their ways when they're older, and I think they think that they can't change. But that's the amazing thing. Like you said, you love the brain. I love the brain too. It's malleable. It could change throughout your whole lifetime. You just have to self-direct it to do so. And that's why I love therapy, and that's why I promote it so much, because a lot of people don't know how to begin that process of promoting those plastic changes in their brain. Um, and so, yeah, that's why I love to do what I do, because I help people change their brains for the better.
We're gonna do this again for sure. I know you have to go.
Yes.
Where can people find you if they want to give you a follow?
So my Instagram account where you can find me, I don't talk too much about lie detection. I'll probably start doing that a little bit more here soon, but it's pretty simple. It's Let's Train the Brain. Or you can find me on LinkedIn if you type in Alyssa DeLeo. That's ALYSSA DILEO. There's a LinkedIn and there's a Psychology Today profile. So you can message me on LinkedIn, you can message me on Instagram or give me a follow. But for now, those are the two spots.
And you have openings in your practice for people who are in the Westchester area to work with you if they're
All
going through something.
Yeah, all of New York. I'm starting to get licensed in Florida as well. That should be done here in the next 2 weeks. So New York and Florida, I'll be licensed
And
in.
you have friends in your life that are law enforcement, you're law enforcement friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. My uncle was a sergeant in a couple towns over. Family, friends that are in it. And I really don't think that law enforcement gets nearly enough support. I think there's a huge stigma attached to therapy, but definitely want you guys all to know that there's no shame in asking for more help. Studies even show that it decreases burnout, it enhances job performance. You're going to be doing better work with the community. It's going to help you in your interpersonal relationships. I think that everyone could benefit from it. You're not less of a man, you're not less of a woman. So, I mean, I think no matter who you are or what you're going through, I think especially law enforcement being subjected to what you guys are, trauma, high stress situations all the time could definitely, reap some benefit from it.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on here. It was a pleasure, and we will be doing this again for sure.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me, Dennis. It was a pleasure.